So it occurred to me very recently when I realized I'd been charged for my annual Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack family plan subscription, which was a surprise additional $80 charge that I forgot would be coming out of my bank account. Yes, indeed, it dawned on me that we have been in this service now for a full year at the time of filming this video on October 25th, 2022. It is exactly 1 year since Switch Online expansion pack has launched. And in today's video, I want to break down the good and the bad of Nintendo Switch Online and where it may be headed from here, and what Nintendo will ultimately need to do to make this a truly must-purchase service for Nintendo Switch users right now. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are looking at Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack exactly 1 year after Nintendo has made this service available, and discussing really the good and the bad of where this service started versus where it's at now, and where do we need to go from here now that it has been available for users to purchase for a full year. And we do have to start with how this thing was unveiled, because if you rewind to a year ago, it was a far-fetched idea to think that Nintendo may add in something like their Nintendo 64 library of games to the Switch. While there was some users that did think it was a logical progression for the service, there was plenty of others that figured that Nintendo values their 3D games differently, and we may only see things like Game Boy family of systems added in and never get to that 3D era of gaming. Clearly, we do not have Game Boy at this point in time, although I do believe that family of systems will make it over in the future, and there are even leaks showing that emulators that have been worked on from Nintendo are a thing for those, so rest assured we will ultimately get Game Boy family of systems added into the service. And that's definitely one of the big things Nintendo should do going forward, is expand the system library. But still, N64 games were a big deal and the big draw around why Nintendo is asking such a astronomical price for this, because if you don't remember all of the controversy, the $50 annual price point for an individual membership was a big deal. With no individual month-by-month options for the service, you are committing to a full 12-month period of giving Nintendo your $50 up front, and at that point in time, we had no clear commitment on how frequently Nintendo would be adding in things like new N64 games or new additional DLC packs, or even Sega Genesis library of games to the service. And while you can say that we still don't really have that definitively, because Nintendo has never come out and committed to a hard date, we have roughly seen them stick to one new N64 game per calendar month since they added in that initial batch of games. We then had a month or two waiting period, and since they added in a new additional N64 games, we have been sticking to one new N64 game per calendar month, and you can basically take it to the bank that that's what you're going to get. However, we are now at a point in time where we are looking at November, getting 2 games in the month of November, and maybe GoldenEye rounds us out for the end of 2022, and that is the big go-home game for this year. Then we have to shift and see if Nintendo sticks to this schedule of 1 per month going forward, or if it may become a more gradual, sporadic update schedule like we've seen take place on the other consoles. And I think I can objectively say that one new N64 game per month, while it doesn't feel like the best treatment in the world as a paying subscriber, it is not bad objectively at the end of the day, in my eyes personally. As long as I have one brand new 3D experience on the N64 from the classic library of games to hop into, I'm relatively happy with that update schedule, providing we don't veer too far off that path and start stretching it out to once every other month for just one new game. And if they do that, then you need to buff it up with doing the 2 new games type thing, maybe for games that are in the same numerical order, like the Mario Party 1 and 2 being bundled together. Maybe we get Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 dropped into the service at the same time. But as long as we are not going long stretches of times, like we see with things like NES and SNES games being entirely sporadic, having a 6-month gap with no new games added into the service at one point, I do not want that to happen with N64 games. And as long as we stick to a somewhat regular update schedule, I will be happy to renew my family plan, which has already happened to my surprise, as I mentioned earlier in the video. And I honestly thought I was hacked for a second when I got that email, because I had no clue why there was funds added to my Nintendo account. And then lo and behold, yes, that 1 year mark has already come and gone. Now, one other big thing that we do have to touch on briefly with the N64 side of things is definitely the controls for this emulator. Yes, there were initial emulation issues that I believe have been fixed to an acceptable standard in my personal viewpoint. Is there a little little nitpicks here and there and things that aren't perfect, absolutely, but things like the major fog rendering issues and just textures not rendering incorrectly at all have been all majorly adjusted and patched as new games have been added into the service. But one big thing that has not been addressed is the controller layout for the N64. If you are not able to buy that $50 NSO controller, which by the way did come in stock here in the US today, briefly I saw on Twitter, so follow some Twitter stock accounts. Wario64 is normally good about tweeting out just about everything gaming related that comes back in stock, so you might get a ton of notifications, but follow that account over on Twitter. I'll have it linked in the description down below if you are still trying to find one of these controllers, because they are totally sporadic on when they restock and they always sell out pretty immediately after that restock happens. One thing that I think Nintendo absolutely needs to add into this service that should have been there from day one and is still missing is the ability to natively remap your buttons in the N64 game layout itself, not the system layout, because that's going to confuse all of your navigational buttons through the Nintendo Switch itself, because you can do it that way, but have a in-emulator button remapping system built in, because the N64 controller, clearly if you just look at it with the C buttons and the layout of this thing, it is not like any other controller since it has come out. So it is not immediately just easily mapped to a pro controller. And yes, you can use the right analog as the C buttons. That kind of works as a good stopgap, but there are still definitely some awkward gameplay experiences depending on what title you were playing with a pro controller. And Nintendo didn't ramp up production of the N64 NSO controller itself to stay in stock, and I think that's a big misstep when it comes to the end consumer experience. Now, to briefly touch on the other console that was a surprise addition is the Sega Genesis library of games, and we haven't seen a consistent update schedule for this either, but we typically see between 3 and 5 new games added in roughly once every other month, so it's skipping a full month typically. That is loosely what I've come to expect from the update schedule on these games, and there have been some quality additions, and just the launch library of Sega Genesis titles were decent for me. At least it had Gunstar Heroes on there. That's the big Sega Genesis classic that I absolutely love and adore, in addition to the Sonic games that I now have as part of the Sonic Origins collection. That's a big deal to me that I still frequently will sometimes boot up and replay just for fun, and I do think it would be nice if we got all of the Sonic Sega Genesis games added into the service, and we may ultimately get that. But things like online play being a part of both the N64 library and the Genesis library of games is a big upgrade compared to how you could go back and experience them otherwise, as you have things like the Sega Genesis Classic Games Collection available on the Switch, but the emulation definitely has issues on that Classic Collection pack, and then you don't have access to things like online play, because even more than Sega Genesis games, like talking about Mario Party 1 and 2 coming out next month with the ability to play online with friends on those old classic N64 games, that is a awesome perk and definitely a big value point when it does come to the expansion pack and that annual price point that they are asking for. And to round out the conversation on the systems that are available as part of this expansion pack, I do think that at some point in 2023, it is time to reveal what is next, because you will start to get to a diminishing point of return with what can be added into these classic library of games. We're still missing some blockbuster marquee ones. The original Super Smash Bros. I think is a shoo-in for the service. Donkey Kong 64, Diddy Kong Racing, hopefully, Banjo-Tooie, and many other rare games that could come over. But I do think past that, you get into things like licensing rights, and that happens on both the Sega Genesis library and the N64 library, and hopefully in 2023 at the same pricing tier with no additional price increase, we should be expecting things like Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and original Game Boy to hit the service, and hopefully the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color find their way into the base tier package, as I think that would be a more consumer friendly way to go about it, as opposed to locking all three behind the expansion pack. And if I'm a betting man, when we see that announcement happen would be at the September 2023 Nintendo Direct that historically Nintendo holds year in and year out, and typically has a section focused on Nintendo Switch Online and what is next as part of that September Direct. That's where I personally think we are getting the announcement for anything that is new in terms of consoles and new libraries for the service. Now, the only other value add that you get for paying that extra money for the expansion pack 1 year later is the access to classic and new DLC, ongoing DLC packs. The biggest one I think you can say that helps sell the service currently is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, that we know will be getting new waves supported all the way through the end of 2023. We are roughly halfway there right now. I would expect either at the end of November or December for wave 3 to finally hit the service, and then we still have another 3 waves to look forward to next year. This was the big addition because when the service launched and it supported Animal Crossing New Horizon DLC with it, that kind of felt like an afterthought and something to throw in last minute to help certain users justify the cost of that $50 annual price point. However, I will personally say that didn't add a lot of value for me, and when Mario Kart was revealed with the Booster Course Pass, because that game sells so freaking well to this day and will never stop selling apparently in the Nintendo Switch era that we are in, it made more logical sense, since that still had momentum behind it, to develop tracks for that game and do that whole Mario Kart Tour cooperation thing, because they were already developing new tracks for Mario Kart Tour, and why not throw those tracks onto Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and sell it as a DLC pack and also attach it as a big value add for NSO Plus expansion pack. That is what Nintendo did, and that definitely changed my viewpoint on what you're getting for that $50 annual price point. We then later got added in the Splatoon 2 Octo DLC, which I do think was a nice marketing ramp up to Splatoon 3, although objectively looking at it now, we haven't had any additional surprise DLC packs, and I do think that we are about at that window where it would make logical sense for Nintendo to announce something new. Maybe that's Xenoblade and some support with that game's ongoing expansion pass, or maybe they look back more towards the past with some big classic titles like Zelda Breath of the Wild for people to get a reason to go hop into those expansion packs if they did not get them the first time around, or if they're really crazy, and I can definitely see them adding this in the more distant future, although I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. That would be the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Fighter Pass, that I do think that if you threw that into the expansion pack, it is definitely a good value add. And ultimately, will they do a DLC revolving door type of formula where certain packs fall out and new ones are added in? That all remains to be seen. So far, it's all been new additions. So if we are at some point up to 5, 6, 7 different DLC packs that are available for part of this expansion pack service, I do think that that helps drive home some extra value for subscribers as well. So all of that said, while I do have my gripes and complaints with where we are at with the expansion pack, I overall am happy for the money I am spending with the service. The only one gripe or option I would like to see Nintendo ultimately do, that I do not unfortunately think they will, I think they are committed to this subscription service. It would be nice to have the option to purchase one-off games individually if we don't want to be a renewing paying subscriber, the same way we can purchase DLC packs and not have to only access those through the expansion pack. I think it would be a nice thing to be able to pick up Ocarina of Time full cost, and that is a permanent part of my Switch library. I would like to have that option, but regardless, these are digital games. Whenever what is next comes out, they may or may not roll forward to the new service. I am hopeful they will, but just like Virtual Console titles past, I rarely hook up my Wii or Wii U to play those digital titles that I purchased at $7.99 or $9.99 or even higher, so that is not a make or break feature for me at the end of the day. I do believe that Nintendo will ultimately roll this subscription model forward into what is next for new Switch hardware, and we could ultimately be talking about things in the far distant future like GameCube library of games on a true Switch successor in a few years. I don't think that happens anytime soon, but I can see it being a long-term play for them. And do we one day see Wii and even DS titles make it over somehow with some kind of creative controller? The Wii is a lot easier with the Joy-Con. The 3DS, I don't know what Nintendo would engineer, maybe a special edition controller that you have to buy in order to support those games. But will this ultimately become the Disney Plus of Nintendo? I hope it does, and I say that as someone who isn't the biggest fan objectively of subscription services, as I'm a physical collector, but the ease and convenience of having these games playable on the go in the Nintendo Switch form factor with things like online play, modern visuals, and up-res textures is a nice prospect for me, and I personally will remain a happy paying subscriber. But I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, all your personal thoughts and feelings on all things Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack now that it's been sold and available for 1 year plus on the market. Are you currently a subscriber? Do you plan to become one soon? Have there been any tipping points in the service that have made you either want to grab it or just discontinue your service altogether? And what do you hope we see Nintendo do with this subscription model going forward? And do you think that something like the individual purchase option or a Virtual Console 2.0 is still on the table realistically at all for Nintendo, or are they all in on the subscription pass like I tend to think that they are? But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.